Wilson of the Oregon Department of Education. I want to welcome you to the fourth of our series of webinars on drones in education. This one is about the research perspective. We've had two on industry perspective and then one on general information about drones in education. I would like to introduce our first presenter briefly, and he'll give you fill you in with a little more detail about himself. Chris Parrish from Oregon State University. And Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and share what you have to say about drones in education in just a second. I want to remind people that you're in listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question, you can submit the question in the question box, and I'll be monitoring that and present those to the presenters at the end of their presentations. So go ahead, Chris.
All right, well, thanks. First of all, thank you all for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. My name is Chris Parrish. I'm an associate professor of geomatics in the School of Civil and Construction Engineering at Oregon State University. I feel I maybe need to start off with a little bit of a caveat. This webinar, this presentation came about kind of quickly for me. I was just asked late last week by Mark Peters, who's OSU's UAS Operations and Compliance Officer, if I would participate in this, and I literally just found out yesterday that I was one of the two main speakers for this. So a little bit ad hoc in how this came together, but no problem at all on my end. I'm always really happy to talk about the research that my students and I are doing with UAS. And what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is primarily some of our work in using UAS for structural inspections. So inspections of things like bridges, communication towers, power transmission lines and towers. And I'll also try to weave in some of the work that we're doing in using UAS in the classroom. So jumping to the next slide, if this works, maybe. Uh-oh. Oh, here we go. Okay, so going to the next slide here, I just wanted to start with a little bit of information about myself. I'm still pretty new to Oregon State University. I joined OSU about 2.5 years ago. Before that, I was a federal government employee. I worked for NOAA's National Geodetic Survey in the Remote Sensing Division. And at NOAA NGS, I was the lead physical scientist in the Remote Sensing Division, and also worked in a program called Integrated Ocean and Coastal Mapping. And actually, I started my career on a NOAA ship, working on the NOAA ship Whiting. This is me in the bottom middle here. You can see I'm not really very good looking, so it's good that you guys only have to listen to me and not see me on this webinar. On this slide, we've got some of my faculty colleagues in geomatics at OSU, Bob Schultz, Tracy Aris, G.A. Park, who's our newest faculty member. G.A. just joined a year ago. Mike Olson up in the upper right. And then down in the lower right, that's Dan Gillens. Dan and I have been involved in a lot of UAS research together. I have to let you know that Dan actually just left OSU this past fall. He coincidentally took a job with the government agency that I used to work for. So he accepted a position with NOAA's National Geodetic Survey. He and I unintentionally flip-flopped. So Dan is now at NGS, but he and I are continuing to work together on a lot of UAS research. By the way, before I get too far, something that I feel like I should mention, there are 3 terms that I'll probably use somewhat synonymously in this presentation: drones, UAS, which is unmanned aircraft systems, and UAVs, which is unmanned aerial vehicles. I know there are a lot of purists out there who draw a distinction between those terms. UAS is the one that the FAA seems to prefer. I'm not really a stickler for terminology, and you'll probably hear me use all of those somewhat synonymously. All right, so moving on. One of the things that's been really exciting to me about the work that I've been able to do in my career to date is that I've really gotten to work with a full range of remote sensing platforms, really from the ground up. Some of the work that I do even now is using satellite-based platforms. So for example, one of my current PhD students and I are doing some work with a satellite that NASA is getting ready to launch next year called ISAT-2. So we're looking at using the NASA ISAT-2 data for mapping bathymetry, in other words, water depths from space. A lot of my work to date has been kind of in this middle portion of this chart here, airborne remote sensing from conventional manned aircraft. So a lot of the work that I did in NOAA was flying around in planes, a lot like this one here. This is a NOAA Cessna Citation, a plane that I flew on quite a bit during my time in NOAA. And what we were doing with that manned aircraft is primarily mapping the coast. So we'd fly portions of the coast. We had aerial cameras on the system. We had airborne LiDAR, light detection and ranging, so we could do laser-based mapping of the coast. And from those data, we would map the national shoreline that would go on to NOAA nautical charts and would also be used in determining marine territorial limits, basically our national boundaries. And then I've also worked with ground survey technologies. So, for example, this terrestrial laser scanner that you can see in the lower left. Since joining OSU, what's been really exciting to me is to move into the world of UAS. I see it as being hugely beneficial. I've described it in the past as being kind of the great equalizer in remote sensing. Previously, when people that wanted to do their own remote sensing, their own airborne surveying and mapping, there was a really high barrier of entry. Basically, if you were not a large government agency or a very large private sector firm that could afford hugely expensive aircraft, sensors, pilots, etc., it was nearly impossible to get into this game. Now, where anybody can go out and buy a drone for as little as a few $100s, perhaps a few $1,000s for a higher quality drone and camera system and some software, you can start doing things that are amazingly similar to things that I was involved in the past in my government position, and do it with a much easier point of entry. All right. So before I get into the research that my students and I are doing, I just wanted to talk really briefly about UAS work at OSU in general. OSU is a fantastic place to be involved in doing research with UAS or drones because it's really well supported. We've got an autonomous systems research group, which is headed by our research office, that's really supportive of faculty, staff, students doing things with UAS. On this slide, we see just a few of the names of people involved. It's a large group. We also collaborate with a private sector company, VDOS Global, that's based here in Corvallis. To me, the greatest thing about working with this group at OSU is that they see it as their mission to really assist researchers in gaining access to UAS technology and to flying UAS legally in support of their work. You can see that in this second bullet here. Right under the research group's webpage, it says that they're out there to assist OSU faculty and staff to gain access to UAS. This may sound like a really simple thing. In fact, it might sound like something that you would almost take for granted, that the University Research Office is there to kind of support us in doing things with UAS. I can say from personal experience that that's actually not the case. I work with a lot of people from different universities, different institutions, and I won't name any names, but I have certainly heard from colleagues at other places that they don't have the great support we have. In fact, in some cases, different universities are actually making it harder rather than making it easier for people to go and fly UAS and to do so legally. So I've felt fortunate to be part of a place that really supports this. One of the things that our research office and the Autonomous Systems Research Group does for us is they will help us to apply for FAA Certificates of Authorization, or COAs. Some of you who are participating in this webinar may now be flying under FAA Part 107. I'll get to that in a second, but I just wanted to make the case that as a public university, we are still operating under COAs. So the research office, again, will apply for these for us. This is the COA that we've been operating under for all the research that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. It's really a very nice COA in that it allows us to fly anywhere in the U.S. That said, there are still some restrictions. We can't operate over populated areas. We can't operate outside of Class G or uncontrolled airspace without additional approvals. But having this COA in place makes things really nice for us. Just really briefly, I wanted to bring up the topic of FAA Part 107 because, again, there may be people on the line today who are operating under FAA Part 107 currently. This just went into effect this past year. It was August 29th of 2016. And basically what this Part 107 does, this is the FAA's small UAS rule. And FAA was very highly motivated. In fact, they were directed under the FAA Modernization and Reform Act, that was Public Law 112-95, that actually directed the Secretary of Transportation to develop rules that would facilitate implementing UAS in the national airspace. And so this was designed primarily to make it easier for people doing things commercially with UAS. I think of particular interest to this group, though, people who are educators, Part 107 also made it easier for people to do educational type things with UAS. Just really quickly, as far as what's better, easier with the new Part 107, you don't need a pilot's license. That was a really high barrier of entry for people. You do still need a remote pilot certificate. You've got to pass a test, be vetted by TSA, be at least 16 years old. But even with all of this, that's still much easier than having to have a full pilot's license in order to fly. Some other things, there was an FAA airworthiness certification that had to be done for aircraft under the old rules, the Part 333, if anybody's heard of that. You don't need to do that anymore. You don't need to file notice to airmen. You don't need a visual observer, etc. You don't have to coordinate with with airports if you're in Class G or uncontrolled airspace. And then this final bullet, again, of interest for this audience, it allows for the use of UAS for educational purposes. Some limitations are still in place. The aircraft need to be registered. You can only operate in what's called visual line of sight mode unless you have an exemption. You can only operate during the daylight or during civil twilight. You can't operate over any persons who are what the FAA calls non-participants, so people not participating in the data collection. You've got to operate below 4,000 feet above ground level or within 400 feet of a structure. This one that's within 400 feet of a structure is really important for us because, as I'm going to show, a lot of the research that we're doing, again, is using UAS for inspecting structures. So if we're inspecting a bridge or we're inspecting a communications tower, we can still operate as long as we're within 400 feet of that structure, even if we're above 400 feet AGL. Again, Class G airspace, minimum visibility of 3 miles. And then finally, we've got to log in and report our flight logs and maintenance on our aircraft. This is for Part 107, but we do this under our FAA COA as well. All right, really briefly, something else to consider for those who, which hopefully is everybody, everyone who wants to operate drones and do so legally. The FAA only regulates the national airspace. In addition to making sure that you adhere to all the FAA's rules and regulations, it's also important to make sure that you're complying with all state and local rules and regulations. So things like privacy, making sure that you're complying with your state or city's privacy laws, things like that, you need to take into account as well. The software that we use internally for making sure we're complying with everything we need to is something called Drone Complier. This is made by the commercial company that I mentioned earlier, VDOS Global. So basically what we do, our students, for example, my students, when we're getting ready to do a research project, will log into Drone Complier. They'll put in the project site where we're going to be working. Drone Complier will first of all tell us what airspace class that is. So again, we need to make sure we're working within Class G or uncontrolled airspace. So this is a project that we're getting ready to do hopefully this coming summer. This is St. Croix and Buck Island, a beautiful place to work. I really hope this project gets approved because I can't wait to get down there and see if we can do some mapping in this beautiful location. But we plug in the site, we get the airspace class, we set up the project, we specify what aircraft we're going to use, and then all of the things that need to get logged so that we can do our required periodic reporting to the FAA, that will all happen automatically within Drone Complier. OSU is part of the FAA Center of Excellence for UAS Research. That's called ASSURE. In May of 2015, ASSURE was funded initially at the level of $5 million a year, and we were one of 15 core universities on that proposal. You can also see there were a lot of large government agencies and commercial firms involved in this, including NOAA, NASA, USGS on the government side, and then some very large, well-known private sector companies from Amazon to Raytheon, Disney, and VDOS. And this is the last thing that I'm going to mention at kind of a high level as far as overarching UAS initiatives at OSU. But we're part of the Pan-Pacific UAS Test Range Complex. Within Oregon, we have 3 approved FAA test ranges. Those are at Tillamook, Warm Springs, and Pendleton. And together, those cover just about the entire state. We're also a partner with SOAR Oregon, which is a statewide nonprofit organization that's focused on developing the UAS industry within Oregon. So moving on to the work that I actually do, a lot of my current research involves using UAS for, as I said, structural inspections. So for example, inspections of bridges and communication towers, like what we see here. This work is being funded by and is done in support of the Oregon Department of Transportation. Right now we're close to wrapping up a 3-year study on the use of UAS in bridge and communication tower inspection. So I'll talk about that just a little bit. First of all, as far as the motivation of it, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think these pictures tell the motivation for this work much better than I can explain it in text or verbally. Basically, looking at this, you can see that the inspections that people do of bridges and towers are inherently dangerous. The inspections are really important in terms of keeping the traveling public safe, the inspections of bridges, for example, but they're dangerous to the inspectors and costly. So when you have inspectors standing in bucket trucks like this, hanging over the side of a building, or excuse me, over the side of the bridge, or you have the inspectors climbing on the underside of the bridge, clearly that's dangerous. In addition, the use of the snooper cranes usually requires, you've got to shut down a lane, and then you need traffic control. All of that expensive and potentially dangerous. So our goal in this research is absolutely not to replace the human inspectors. The human inspectors are still going to be there. They're still going to be leading everything. They're still going to be a critical part of all this. But the UAS basically just gives them another tool in their toolbox, something else that they can use to do their jobs a little bit better and maybe most importantly, a little bit safer. All right. So moving on, one of the first things that we looked at in this study is what type of aircraft would be best for inspection work. And you can see I've broken it down into 3 main categories here. You've got fixed-wing aircraft like these in the upper right. Then we've got multi-rotor like these in the lower right, and then helicopters like those on the left. Starting with these fixed-wing aircraft, one of the great advantages of fixed-wing aircraft is endurance. Some of the fixed wings have an endurance of over an hour on a single battery, which is pretty amazing. And what allows them to be so efficient is that they can glide. So if you've got large areas that you want to map, fixed wings might be a good choice. Although I guess I'll say one caveat there is if you've got a really large area to map. If you've got an area as large as the entire OSU campus, for example, you're already getting into the range where conventional manned aircraft might be a little bit more economical. But for kind of, areas that are larger than what you might use a multi-rotor for, but not large enough that you might be considering using a manned aircraft, these fixed wings UAVs are really a good choice. Moving down to the multi-rotors. The multi-rotors we found are really the best option for inspection. And that's for a couple reasons. One of the things that the multi-rotors can do is they can do vertical takeoff and landing. So that's pretty important if you've got small areas that you need to be able to work in. even more importantly, they can hover in place. So you can imagine if you're doing an inspection of a bridge or a tower, there might be certain elements that you need to be able to inspect. So being able to take your UAV and hover in place right next to that element, or as close as you can safely get to that element, and then being able to maybe maneuver your camera using the gimbal mount and point right at the thing that you want to look at and zoom in. That's really important for doing inspections. And then finally, this category on the left here, the helicopters. The helicopters, a lot of these are gas powered, and the big advantage that they have is greater lift capabilities. So they can lift larger payloads, larger cameras, maybe LiDAR, again, light detection and ranging sensors. But what we identified really quickly is that these multi-rotors, the quadcopters, hexacopters, octocopters, these tend to work really well for the inspections. And then this is the platform that we ended up selecting. So we purchased this aircraft. It's called the SenseFly Albrus. Initially, they actually named it the Exum, and then there was a large oil and gas company that felt like that might have been copyright infringement, so they ended up changing their name to the Albrus. But this platform we found was really well suited for doing this inspection work. If you look at the front of the platform, you've got this kind of ball that's on the front of the aircraft. SenseFly refers to that as the triple view sensor head. That's where the main cameras are located, and there are 3 main cameras. We've got a thermal infrared camera, HD video, and then 38 megapixel still camera. And this front-mounted sensor head, it can tilt. So it can tilt everywhere from looking straight up or zenith to looking straight down or nadir, and then anywhere in between. And that's really good if you're trying to do something like inspecting a bridge. Something else that is really nice about that particular platform is that all around the sides of the platform and then on the bottom of the platform, we've got ultrasonic sensors and navigation cameras, nav cams. What those allow us to do is maintain a fixed standoff distance. So if we're trying to inspect a structure like a bridge or a tower, you want to be able to get close to that bridge or tower, but obviously you don't want to get so close that you're at risk of crashing into the structure that you're trying to inspect. So by using these ultrasonic sensors and the nav cams, you can maintain a fixed standoff distance. You can say you want to be 5 meters away from this structure, and you can actually lock in and have the platform hold itself that fixed distance. If you try to get too close, it will bump you back. If you get too far away, it'll suck you in. And so there are 2 different modes that we use, what's called cruise control, and then again this fixed standoff. So we're inspecting the structure and kind of gliding along the side of it, maintaining that fixed standoff distance. Something else that's nice about that platform, the SenseFly Albrus, is the thermal infrared camera. So we're actually just starting to do work in inspection of power transmission lines and towers. And although we're just now at the part of trying to see what we can do with this thermal imagery, we're thinking it's going to be really good for these type of power transmission line inspections. One of the other nice things about the platform that we selected is the flight planning software that comes with it. We've got flight planning software called eMotionX, which really facilitates inspection work. So if you're trying to inspect something like a vertical tower, you can do this type of cylindrical flight plan that's shown over on the right. And each one of those little marks, those little triangles or whatever cones, whatever those are, that's an individual camera point. So you put in this type of flight pattern, and then the aircraft can automatically fly in circles around the structure, and everywhere where it's got one of these little cones, that's a place where it's going to take a photo. You can just kind of see what that looks like, and looking down on it or looking from the side. The other type of mapping pattern that we sometimes use is this kind of horizontal mapping flight plan. This we refer to as mowing the lawn, and this is really similar to what I used to do as a government employee when I was doing mapping work with manned aircraft, where we just have this kind of box, this large rectangle, and we wanted to map that area, and so we just fly back and forth in the sky, acquiring imagery. This works well, not so much for the inspection work, but if we're trying to create a map of a large area. And by the way, something I've got to say, kind of as an aside, people when they think about drones, they think it's going to be really exciting. Wow, cool drones. I think maybe that's because people have been watching a lot of TV where they see these drone races and things like that. In the real world, in all of the sort of production or routine mapping that we've done, flying the UAVs is actually kind of boring. Again, you're just kind of going back and forth in the sky, covering these large rectangular areas. If it gets too exciting, that's actually really a bad thing because it probably means that something is going wrong. All right, so to date, we've inspected 4 different bridges as part of this ODOT project. We've done Independence Bridge over the Willamette River in Independence, Oregon, 2 over in Warm Springs area, the Mill Creek Bridge and Crooked River Bridge. You can see that Sensible Aubris that I talked about earlier. This one in the upper left is actually a DJI Phantom 3 that we used on our first inspection before we purchased that Aubris. And then St. John's Bridge, which we did most recently. This is also a different platform. Here we used the DJI S900 for that one. Looking at the imagery visually, this is what most inspectors are interested in. They kind of think in terms of, okay, you inspect the tower, you inspect the bridge, you're getting this real-time video or high-resolution still imagery, and you just want to be able to inspect it in real time and see what's going on. This works fine. In fact, this one's kind of interesting. I've got to tell a story here too. This was an inspection of a communication tower that we did for ODOT. And here the inspector actually climbed up in that tower ahead of us coming out with the UAV and purposefully loosened this bolt right here because he wanted to see if we could detect it in the imagery. And sure enough, as we were flying it, we could see that there's something going on here. We got this loose bolt. So this is kind of the mode that most people are thinking of is you do these flights and you get your imagery in real time and you analyze it in real time. That's all well and good, but in a little bit I'm going to talk about some other things that we can do when we take advantage of the types of post-processing that we can do of the imagery. So as far as analyzing things in real time, here's some examples of doing inspections of bridges. We can see where we've got some cracking of the concrete, looking at some rusting pins, paint failure, pack rust, all things that we can do with real-time assessment of the imagery. The other thing, like I said, that we can do is post-process the imagery. And what we can take advantage of there is something called structure for motion. These are new photogrammetric algorithms designed for being able to reconstruct 3D geometry and make precise measurements in 3D space. So we've got software like Agisoft PhotoScan, Pix4D. We collect our UAS imagery, process it, and we can create these things like point clouds, where what we're looking at here in the lower right, this is a point cloud. It almost looks like an image. It's not. If I were to zoom in on this, every single point here has XYZ coordinates, red, green, blue intensity values. So we can actually take this and make measurements in 3D space from this type of model. To do that, we need to get ground control. So we've got field survey crews who are out at the time that we're collecting the UAS imagery that are collecting GPS on these photo targets. Then when we're done, we create, again, here's a zoomed up image. At this point, you can maybe almost see that this is a point cloud. It's pixelated enough that it no longer looks like an image. You can kind of see that each one of these is individual points. What can you do with this? Well, let me show you. This is a video. So here we've made this kind of 3D model, this 3D point cloud of a bridge, Crooked River Bridge out near Warm Springs, Oregon. So letting that software process, we can create this kind of point cloud. We can take it and on the computer, just like we're seeing here, we can rotate it around, zoom in, we can make precise 3D measurements. I don't know how long to let this go, but this is a really kind of cool fly-through that one of my students created from the imagery that we collected for this bridge. I'll kind of stop this one and keep going here in the interest of time. Again, just a couple looks at that type of point cloud and what you can do with it. Another thing that's really cool is once that point cloud is created, you can click on any individual point in the point cloud and pop up every single image that that point appeared in. So if you're trying to do an inspection, in this case an inspection of a tower, and there's something that you want to look at, one particular bolt or whatever, you can find that in the point cloud, hit a button, and pop up all the photos in which it appeared. Another example of the same thing, looking at one of the pins here on the bridge. Yet another thing that you can do with that type of point cloud is, in this case, beam path analysis. So here was an example where the FAA tower inspectors wanted to know about obstructing vegetation. So vegetation around that tower that was going to interfere with the beam path. So we create the point cloud. We can superimpose what that beam pattern is going to look like, and then try to find everything that's going to be obstructing vegetation. Using UAS for inspecting power equipment. This is another thing that we've recently gotten into. Here's an example where we just did an inspection with that same platform, the SenseFly Obris, at the Pacific Power Facility at Brownsville. I've got yet another video that I wanted to start. This one is kind of cool because, well, it's got some cool music that goes along with it. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear that or not. But what we'll see as I start this is that it also shows the thermal imagery. So as we look at different parts of this substation, you'll see the thermal imagery pop up. We're just now at the stage of really trying to determine how best to analyze this thermal imagery. I wouldn't put too much faith into these actual temperature measurements because we don't have it that well calibrated right now. But you can probably get the sense that just by looking at something like this, if you can see a particular element that's much hotter or much cooler than the others around it, that might immediately be something that we want to focus in on and take a better look at. I'll keep going here. Really quickly, some of my other work using UAS, I'm very interested in coastal applications, again, going back to my time in NOAA. So I'm just starting to use UAS in some of our coastal mapping work. Also for river mapping. Some of my students just a few months ago in December went down and acquired some UAV imagery of the Rogue River. You can see some of their transects there. Something that I found really interesting is from those point clouds, like I was showing you earlier, where you've got these X, Y, Z coordinates of points, we can even map, in some cases, underwater points to get the bathymetry or depth information. And then lastly, something that I think is going to be maybe of greatest interest to this group is using UAVs in the classroom. This is something that I've gotten into just over the past year. It, to me, is incredibly fun. It's a great way to get the next generation of engineers and scientists engaged in using this technology, is actually to bring it into the classroom. So last year I did 2 middle school UAV / remote sensing workshops. In this image to the left here, this is one of my graduate students, Richie Slocum, who we actually brought that SenseFly Obris into the classroom and demonstrated it for the students. And over on the right here, that's actually my daughter, Catherine, holding that the SenseFly Obris. One of the things that we showed the kids that they really enjoyed is the thermal imagery. So we were actually able to acquire thermal imagery of the classroom. We could show the kids what they looks like in the thermal image. We could get them thinking about imaging in other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum than what our eyes sense in. So what would it look like if our eyes had thermal sensors, for example? What would the world look like? And then we did this little exercise that I think the students found to be really fun. We gave them infrared thermometers. So these little handheld devices that they have here, these are infrared thermometers that they were able to walk around the playground taking measurements, surface temperature measurements, and then they were able to fill out these little maps like what's shown here. So they used colored pencils to fill in the different surface temperatures that they measured with their handheld thermometers, and then we compared that with what thermal imagery that we'd acquired ahead of time, and they could kind of say, okay, how does my map compare with what you might get with the UAS? I've done that work as part of an organization called OregonView. I'm currently the director of OregonView. This is under a parent organization called AmericaView, which is sponsored by USGS. And really one of the main goals of that organization is to get remote sensing technologies, geospatial technologies, out to kids in K through 12 classrooms. So to me, again, that's been a tremendous amount of fun. Most of my work has been all at the university level. So being able to go into K through 12 classrooms and show this to younger students has been great. And I really thank OregonView and AmericaView for the opportunity to do that. I also use UAS in my classes at the university level. So one of the classes that I teach is called Kinematic Positioning and Navigation. That's a graduate level class. So the 2 times that I've taught this, the 2 terms that I've taught this here at OSU, my students have done final projects using UAS. All right, this is nearly all I've got. I just wanted to really quickly thank some folks. Oregon Department of Transportation for the project that they're sponsoring. It's been a lot of fun for my students and I to work on. PacTrans, we had another project funded through PacTrans, which was also UAV bridge inspection, and AmericaView, again, for their support of the K through 12 education. This is all I've got. This is my last slide. That's how to contact me if anyone is interested in doing so. And at this point, I'll either go ahead and pass it back to Tom, or I think Victor is going to take over after this.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm going to quickly switch over to Victor here, but also remind people that you can put your questions in the question box, and we will get to those after Victor's presentation. And Victor, I see your slides there, so it looks like we've transitioned. Are you off mute now?
Yep, I am now.
Okay, great. And Victor, I'll let you introduce yourself and what you do. And
great. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, my name is Victor Villegas. I'm a Technology and Media Support Coordinator for Oregon State University Extension Service. So I support all of the extension offices and ag experiment stations across the state. We have at least one office in each county, and we have 12 regional ag experiment stations. We basically share the information from the university out to communities, and one of my special projects is actually doing public education on drone technology, so the different types of uses we have here at OSU. Just really quickly kind of go over what we have at OSU. It's not just the flying robots, but also the ground and water-based ones, which incidentally are starting to also be called drones. Anything that has that doesn't have a human being on board is starting to be known as a drone vehicle. So OSU has the robotics programs considered best in the West. UAS flights and autonomous systems are being used for agriculture, oceanography, fish and wildlife, earth sciences, forestry, engineering. As you saw, Chris explained some of his engineering projects there, liberal arts. We have one of the most active programs for drones in the country, and also partners with PPUTRC and Assure. We've done over 200 missions in last year, 2016. Chris talked about the drone complier software that helps us, the researchers, do their project, figuring out where they can fly legally and have all that stuff done on the back end, so they don't have to worry about it. They just have to do their research project while all the other stuff's taken care of by the research office, all of the paperwork with the FAA and whatnot. He already went over the code stuff, so I won't go over that. We have over 40 drones in the research fleet, lots of commercial off-the-shelf, and the big thing about this is that this has allowed us to be able to do projects at a lot less cost as compared to manned aircraft, which is what a lot of the researchers had to do before. Some of the investments, we have over 25 robotics and AI faculty. 50 across all of OSU, 120 plus grad students, 80 undergrads. PhD, MS degrees in robotics is ranked number 4 and probably getting up higher there. College of Engineering, we just recruited a faculty, Julie Adams. She's in the robotics, and one of the main reasons OSU was because where she was at before, she could not do her research because the university was actually not allowing her to do the flying, and so OSU was one of the places that we encourage it, and we actually look for ways to say yes instead of no, and doing it legally and safely. College of Forestry, a big user of UAS. This is their website here for the Aerial Information Systems Laboratory. Some of the different objectives that they're researching, fire monitoring, vineyard health, boundary protection, search and rescue, fish population estimation, just a whole slew of different things that they can use for research within the College of Forestry. Here's a really quick example. So observing for caged quail, it's really hard to see that. You see the visual photo on the left. Can't tell that there's a quail there, but if you're using the FLIR View Pro thermal infrared sensor, it's a lot easier to tell, yeah, there's actually a warm body there, and so it speeds up the time for identification. Nursery inventory management was one of the projects, College of Ag. This was done at one of our research stations in Aurora, our NREC, North Willamette Research and Extension. And it's basically flew over, took some pictures over nurseries and run the photographs through special algorithms, would count the pots, and we could instantly see how many pots we had in a certain area instead of having to go manually and count them each individually. Whale studies, there's a drones called a SnotBot. It actually flies over the whales and will go into their spray, and they can gather the DNA and see how the health of the whale is based on that. Future at OSU, we're looking at doing research in remote sensing, aerospace management, autonomous flight, especially swarm technologies where the collaboration between drones working autonomously with each other. The robotics is looking into that. Marine studies, we're also looking at working with industry to bring a world-class UAS training facilities and have our students be able to work hands-on within this hangar and also this outdoor arena per se, where we can do calibrations of our sensors. And lastly, we've partnered with the Oregon Department of Education to bring you these webinars and the workshop that we're having in June. I believe that's June 27th through the 29th. So look forward to seeing many of you there. We'll have information on how you can get your Part 107, and we'll have information on how to use drones with your students to get them interested in STEM. And with that, we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Victor. We do have a couple questions, so I just want to remind people that you can submit questions through the question box, and I will start here. So, Victor, if you just want to leave that slide up, did you give back the control to me? No, you're still presenter.
I did,
yeah,
but I can put it back up.
Just looks better than the white space there. So,
okay.
So I'm gonna take a look at the questions that we have here, and hang on just a second. It'll just take me a second to get them so I can actually read them. So we have a few questions, and some of these were from earlier on. Some early questions, and Chris or Victor, you can kind of decide who would be the best to respond to these. So we have a question here, and it says, we have staff and students that can drive vehicles, operate special equipment, navigate boats, but we need to get a permit for every single flight we want to fly to get these days in advance of a flight. Any ideas on how to get better acceptance of flights? Say blanket permits. We have the UAV pilot's license. So do you want to kind of talk about that in terms of, sounds like you're doing some work to try to streamline that process.
Victor, do you want to take that one with regards to FAA Part 107 and educational use?
Sure. Well, with the 107, if you're in G-class airspace, you don't have to do it in advance. You just have to make sure if you're within 5 miles of an airport, you have to call and make sure you can do that. With the 107, if you need a waiver to fly within controlled airspace, that takes time. But if you're in G-class, as long as you're under 400 feet, you're not flying at night, not flying over people, you should be able to qualify for that. So I'm not sure exactly which is the issue that you're having. Who you're trying to contact? Is it the FAA or is it school officials or whatnot? So more information would be needed to answer that.
Yeah, Victor, I think this is coming from, judging from the email address for the person that submitted, that's coming from University of Oregon, so they may be talking about some of their attempts to use at the university level. It sounds like what you're saying is the Part 107 has eased some of the needs, but still, if you wanted to get into restricted airspace and those kinds of things, controlled airspace, you'd need to go with the COA route. Is that correct?
Well, and the COA is only available for public universities. Yeah, so with the 107, you actually have to go through a web portal that the FAA sends to you, and those waivers, if you're asking for permission to for the waivers, it can take 60, 90 days or whatnot. So it's something they're still working on. It will get better, but right now it's a little bit of a hassle.
I guess I'd add to that. So the Part 107 has made it easier for student use of drones, but for faculty using it for research, for example, you still need to go the route of either the COA or the Part 107, or another option that would still be available to you is to use the 333 exemption. Of those, it kind of depends on what use you have in mind. As I mentioned in my talk, we're still flying under COAs. That's worked quite well for us. A lot of people, since the Part 107 was released in this past August 29th, a lot of people have kind of jumped on that. It does ease things, particularly compared to the old 333 exemptions that people were having to go through. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's eased the requirements where people are not required to have full FAA pilot's licenses, but they still do have to go in and become, they have to get the remote pilot's certificate. Some of my students have started going through that process. They've said it's not too bad. It takes, I haven't done it yet myself, but they said it's taken them about a week roughly of studying and going through some online materials, and then they're able to pass the test and get their Part 107 certificate.
I've noticed also that there are quite a few more places that are offering that sort of online material and everything.
Yeah, for better or worse, a bunch of businesses have popped up that will, you know, for a fee, they'll help you pass that course.
And of course, the workshop that we're doing in the summer is one of the reasons is to help folks with that.
Okay. Kind of continuing along the same line, so we have a number of questions from the same individual here. Also, we have a researcher working overseas that wants to use UAVs. Can they adhere to the host country rules and drop FAA rules while overseas?
That's a good question. Mark would have the answer to that. Unfortunately, he's not here.
That's a good point, because there's a great support in that Mark Peters, and we will try to get that information, his contact information, out to folks, or they can get in touch with Victor or probably Chris too to get hold of Mark. And
he deals with export import controls, so that could be tricky.
Yeah, I was going to say some of these questions get so dicey. I almost just hesitate to respond, because when it gets into providing legal advice, I really don't want to overstep my bounds. I will say I have actually seen it work kind of the other way, where people have gone to different countries. We had some flights in Nepal after the earthquake there. that some of my colleagues were involved in, and rather than making it easier for them to fly, in some ways it made it tougher, because they do, of course, then need to make sure they're adhering to all the regulations of the host country. And I am aware in one case of a time when the local police came and said, okay, well, you guys aren't supposed to be operating here. And of course, they immediately shut down after that. I'm not sure where to go, actually, to get the best advice on what the laws of different countries may be. But needless to say, that's something that you definitely want to take into account if you're flying somewhere else.
Okay. Kind of switch here. What is the favored program? PhotoScan, VSM, or other?
My students in my lab, we've got both PhotoScan and Pix4D. Some of my students have done kind of head-to-head comparisons of those two. There hasn't been a clear winner. The bottom line is that both have things that they do pretty well, and both have some advantages maybe over the other. I think some of the students have gotten more used to Agisoft PhotoScan, so they tend to use that more. But Pix4D is pretty robust as well.
Okay. And there's another question here, and I'm not really sure what the question is, so maybe Dean can resubmit it with a little clarity here. So it says, how experimental can we get the drone test areas? I'm not really sure. Maybe that makes sense to you, you two, or maybe we need to ask for a little clarification on that question. Does that make any sense? Is that something, or do you need a little clarification?
Can you read that one again?
How experimental can we get the drone test areas?
Yeah, I guess I'm also not entirely sure what that question is getting at.
Oh, okay.
Possibly
well, here's a clarification. Yeah. It says, do we need to adhere to 400 feet limits in drone test areas, et cetera?
Oh,
in other words, I guess how, yeah. So that's that seems to be the direction that's going.
It depends. If you just want to fly straight off, yes. If you need special waiver, then you have to apply for a waiver to do that.
So pretty much the rules still apply in those settings in terms of even the test areas in there. That's what you're kind of saying? In
the test areas, it's from what I understand, a case-by-case basis. Yeah, it's not just
okay.
Right.
Not a blanket.
Maybe it would facilitate it. I don't know, but if you're going to apply for a certificate of waiver to do a certain type of operations where you're getting above that the 400-foot ceiling, or doing something beyond visual line of sight, or maybe doing nighttime operations or something like that, and you're going to apply to the FAA for a waiver for that, perhaps it would help if that was being done within one of the test ranges.
Yeah, it might make it easier.
Okay, sounds like you answered the question there from the last piece that I got there. So, there is another question. I think it was about convincing a campus risk office to get them to relax for getting permits. That may be something that might be a good thing to have kind of understand more about offline, kind of understanding some specific practices that you folks have used to sort of ease the burden and support the work in terms of at OSU.
Yeah, I've got a thought there, and it would be to have the compliance people at whatever institution you're at to put them in touch with Mark Peters here at OSU, because again, Mark and the research office have facilitated a lot of things for us. So maybe if we just have counterparts at different universities, talking to the folks at OSU, finding out what what policies, practices, procedures they've put in place to make sure that here that we're complying with the rules. Maybe those kind of conversations would help other institutions implement some of the same things.
Okay.
Just a thought, and I realize I just volunteered for something, but since he's not here,
well, I'll tell you what. When I send out the information and remind people where they can get this recording and the slides and everything like that, then people will have my email address if they don't already, and can I can forward on their email to Mark and let him kind of get in touch with them. I know
you can also go to the website oregonstate.edu/drones, and we have our policies up there. More information. So
excellent. I know at the K-12 level there have been some changes as far as some of the insurance restrictions that were happening have been eased quite a bit. So that it used to be you'd have to get a fairly expensive rider to fly, and now that's no longer in existence. So there are some things that have eased off a little bit in the last year or so that make it substantially easier to fly and to use this technology in classrooms. So I'm going to pause. That's the last of the questions we have for the moment. And so I'm going to pause for just a second if you two have a couple more minutes. We have a few more minutes left. Just wait to see if there are any more questions. Also want to remind people that this is recorded. We will send you a link to that recording probably early next week with also a link to where you can get the slides, the PowerPoint slides to do that. So we'll just pause for just a second here to see if any more incoming questions. And if you don't have any questions, then we have really come to the conclusion of our webinar. So give it a quick pause here. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. Thank you both for your presentations today. I really appreciate Chris and Victor. And we will, again, have this stuff available to everybody and let you know where exactly to find that. And their contact information, I think, was on their slides, so if you wanted to get in touch there, feel free to send questions to me, Tom Thompson, Department of Education. I'll try to direct things in the right direction and get the right people to answer some of those questions. Thank you once again for attending. At this time, we'll shut down the webinar and hope that you all have a great evening and join us in June, the last week in June, for the 3-day workshop at OSU for educators. It's all educators, so it's not just K-12, and all Oregon educators. It's the workshop is free. Except that if you need to travel or you need lodging, that will be on your own, but the content of the workshop is absolutely free for Oregon educators. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Victor. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.